Alright, chapter round 8, Enhancing Providence. Play long and prosper. Apologies to Mr. Spock. Almost all casino games with a positive expectation for the house of however time of the house wins the share of the total wage of the amount that they arbitrarily close. They expect to give the advantage of the money that the casino wins pays for particular entrances, lavish decor with no dimension payroll over the course of the profits of the shareholder, the vested than some of the point of the game revenue make casino. Still other department food rooms and etc. lost later for the bringing gamblers through the door. Given reliance for the gambling revenue, it is easy why the casino didn't look to lose even easier for the understand why they didn't look on the card count. Go to the great lengths to discourage it. In chapter, we investigate additional methods to improve our edge, discuss how we can exercise our advantage in facing casino scrutiny. Fewer of the decks. One of the easiest ways to improve the performance is to play with a fewer number of the decks are in use. We saw with the chapter 2, we also being equal a game with a fewer deck with a higher basic strategy expectation means that the disadvantage over the coming is small, but also the game with the fewer deck with greater fluctuation. The composition recover the key to card counting, we identify with a favorable situation, taking advantage of them. These factor in favorable situation are out of the wide when cards come out is unexpected, and it shows the expectation of hardness, percentage of the hand's expectation, 1, 2 decks, 3 decks, 6 decks, and 8 decks. It's impossible to count multiple decks. Blackjack fallacy. We've heard that many times that even Telly Savalas laminated the difficulty in the ABC of the Blackjack video, commenting that it's more than 2 decks. Hey, forget it. The myth is further propagated when the card counting is categorized primarily a feat of memory. For example, consider John Scare's thought of the subject of the most variable natural amplitude of the blackjack can possess the fairly rare faculty of remembering most of the previously exposed cards of the player who cannot do this has little or no chance of beating the bank in the long run. In fact, it isn't any more difficult than counting multiple decks than single deck, which start with a different initial running count based on the number of decks on the plan. But after the mechanics are all the same, we not attempt to remember the cards in play. It's however more difficult to win against the multiple decks we discussed earlier. The basic strategy expectation is lower, which means we have a greater hump to climb over. The furthermore with a favorable fluctuation that composition, hence the percentage of the time players have an advantage are smaller. This means we have to use the larger betting spread in order to gain the same advantage. So while the level of difficulty does not increase for the counting multiple decks, we are often better off seeking out the games for the fewer decks. Proportions compared to an average such excess high card remains in games. The fewer decks will occur more often. Calorie with a multiple deck requires greater betting spread. The yield of the same profitable since fluctuation composition are less practical. The percentage of the time the player has advantages goes down, making it necessary to bet more when opportunities arise. Better penetration. Another way to improve the result of the fine of the deck of the penetrate for the means of the more cards the dealt out prior to the shuffle, which means they're bound to getting closer to the pivot point with the ultimate density. If the cards are dealt with, hence they will there will be more times when they have the advantage. As mentioned in the last chapter, do not worry better penetration rendered with the strategy metrics numbers inaccurately. If you found that the dealer has deal fars into the pack, but gain the expectation of additional volatility counter closure of the pivot point with a better opportunities well far out. Tiny disadvantages inherited from the diminished accuracy in strategy play. Fewer players playing the fewer no other players' tables allows you to see more of the cards before making a decision. Indeed, you're playing ahead of the dealer. You should get to see all the cards you replayed with no problem. But there's a downside of head-up play. Some dealers are very fast too. Two novice counting that is often problematic since the rush, and you may find it difficult to keep counting the recall. And correct plays, on the other hand, once you have the mechanism down cold, you will find that head-up play is quick always and wager more money to give it amount of time. We'll go back and we'll look at that. The third baseman is killing me. Blackjack fallacy. Can the play of another player, no matter how good or bad, affect your chance of winning the blackjack? Many people believe it can. The bad players somehow bring down the entire table, with the poor players not so. In reality, players other than no impact on their own. Unfortunately, only expectation is that the other players use the awful main cards cover the reshuffle. If there's sufficient cards to finish the round, the other players have no overall effect of the expected outcome. Let's look at mathematical looks, and the truth is know that the remaining deck contains X card, the 10 and aces, MY, bad cards 2 through 7, and N and Z. Neutral cards 8 and 9 at the end of the deck. You're running the count will be deposit 4, so the represent of the counting it at 4 but equals X minus Y. No less consider the next hit. The following probability of getting a good bad hit the neutral card. You have X is divided by X plus Y plus Z. Y is divided by X plus Y and Z is equal to X plus Y plus Z. Assume the moment of the someone playing ahead uses the takes a hit, but the player takes a good card. There is now an X minus 1. The good card is X plus Y plus Z minus 1. Total cards remain. They give it a chance of the getting of the good card, but after him will be X plus minus 1 divided by X plus Z minus 1. Likely, why the player gets a bad card or a chance of getting good card would be X divided by X plus Z minus 1. Finally, for the good player with the neutral card or chance getting of the good card would be getting X plus Z plus minus 1. Determine the overall chance of the getting of the good card, but in need of the multiple each of the conditional chain with the respect of the probabilities and add. So, and then we've collected these terms in the numerator given and simplified to X equals X minus X plus Y minus Z. And as you can see, with the precisely original chain for the getting of the good card, but they have taken the first. Know the difference. Whether the earlier player takes a hit, the 2 hits for the 20 hits over will still have the same chain for the getting of the card we want, as long as there's at least 1 card left after he's done with his hand. Furthermore, as long sufficient card left to finish the round would make no difference how the other players to determine the expected final value of the other hand, dealer's hand. Hence, you're a chance of ultimate winning and losing. Exit strategy to avoid poor counts. We discover the techniques bad counting, which is always you to avoid poor counts. Let's apply with the same concept with a different context. Say you're playing the 2-deck game. 1 deck is already the dead. The deal standard running count should now be 0. If it says it's -6 instead of the expectation, obviously negative, you may want to pick up your chip at another table rather than play out last few hands, or you may want to take a well-timed laboratory break. When proper timing, you can get up and stretch your legs, hit the restroom, return in the time, end of the shuffle, start the fresh deck. Let's successfully avoid playing in the several hands of the proper negative expectation. To this end of the knockout count can be played with the exit strategy, exit conditions, pair of numbers consisting of the exit count at exit point. If you're at or below the exit count with at the exit point, you leave the game. This is an advanced strategy that is most useful in shoe games. For example, standard counting scheme is we should start with a knockout with an initial running count in the -20 for 6 decks, now with 28 for 8 decks. The 8 strategies consist of the following additions. Table entry of the page 18 file with the first located with the column corresponding with the question 6 to 8 decks. Determine the appropriate exit points with the last month of the column. The 6 to 8 deck game, where you can label that 1 deck has been dealt with a running count in less than -22, but we're playing 6 deck table. Notice 1 card of the ways to shoot 1 1/2 deck is dealt with the running count. Suddenly falls to 24 to the beneficial you of the exit game. Similar to 8 deck game, you can leave it after playing 3 decks if running count is less than or equal to -22, so forth. A knockout standard exit strategy. Leave and running count greater than or less than or greater than equal to the number of decks count. Of course, adapting an exit strategy requires you to roughly estimate the number of decks already played. However, with the decks estimation, you need not to accurately anything 20% that you do. We notice that introducing the extra strategy with the K knockout fabulous 5-6 deck variation. Remember that we shifted the initial running count by plus 17. You need to adjust the exit counts by the same account. With this, leave the following addition: 6 deck game. Leave it a -5 less than 1 deck is played. Leave it at the 0 less than 2 decks played. Leave it at +5 less than 3 decks played. And all values are divisible by 5. Proper use of the exit strategy is nearly double the win rate per hand. Normal surprising because you avoid the situation favorable condition combination of the higher expectation, couple of large average bet size, yield tremendous game and winning rate. Longevity, simple, since Blackjack is one of the fewest casino games potential for you beatable. The casinos instruct the pit personnel with watch for the card counter, in principle with the pit identified with the counters. Counting the cards themselves. It's principle that the pit can identify counters by counting the cards themselves. More often, they rely on others telling to determine if the players are counting to reflect with good counters, throw curves by acting naive, making erratic plays. Those cover plays otherwise behaving contrary to what was expected with a stereotypical nerdy counter. As much life of the card counter consists of the ongoing cat and mouse game with the casino personnel with the card counter attempting to betray himself with his unworthy attention while the pit boss is looking for anyone who appeared to be passionate. Let's take a look at what we're up against. The casino takes two primary steps in dealing with the card's counter: identification and action. The opinion counter of the trick try to avoid identification, such as after have been spotted. It's usually all she wrote. At the most profitable time of the card counter is before he has been identified or even suspected. After identifying you, the casino may take countermeasures to throw off your effectiveness. Many pit survivors actually do not know how to count. This is not true at all. This is not true of all of them, but even when they don't count aware ways, certain clues telltale mannerisms card counters typically exhibit, including large bet variations, affect them. See every card deep concentration of the subteller include with the taking insurance only with a big bet out, the tie correlation, never the big bet off the top of the new deck, never drinking, never tipping the dealer. Because all the card counting system require better variation strategies, adjustment of the very similar really doesn't matter with a particular system player uses the supervisor knows if the casino boss is proficient, watches your play long enough, he will probably be able to tell whether or not you're counting. For this reason, many counters cool it with the pit boss come over to watch the begin flat betting and making same bet regardless of the count, and may case revert to playing basic strategy only. This continues until the pit boss leaves and goes around another player. Fortunately, it's hard and unnatural to be constantly on the lookout for floor personnel while playing. While one pit boss is leaving, there may be another right behind him still watching. In some casinos, suspicious pit bosses may initiate with a counter measurement of his own. Other places that he may call the buddy over that may be both sharing and eat down for a while. This heat is designed to unnerve card encounters in remarkable effect. Large establishment remove the expert counters and sometimes employ what they call upon evaluate the skill of the player who is suspected by the pirate. The expert may be brought into the pit to observe the player for 15-30 minutes before rendering a judgment. Other than the higher-end casinos employ every but sophisticated means with the new card counter software allow the surveillance staff input by the voice place wager card strategic decision play programs that rates each player with the estimating player expectation. Your interest knowing while many players count, they're not all good enough to actually derive the pot of the expectation errors counting coupled with the errors in play with the tip admittedly employing a large betting spread often conspire to many good players not quite good enough to come out ahead of the long run. Casinos also know a common thing we found speaking with the casino executives is while they analyzing a potential card counter, the key point is determining whether they or not the player is good enough to beat the casino. The player may be counting cards yet still be an overall negative expectation. Boss decides that the player is not capable enough to possess threat. The house must still deal. The player, strangely enough, some of the professional blackjack players seem to almost need to be barred every so often to validate their skills. To most, being barred is not enjoyable. Screaming to the reality of the enemy has been discovered. You're unnerved with many counters. If you're barred, just asked to leave. Pick up all your money and chips that these are. Don't just leave the table. Leave the casino too. In Nevada, casinos are still allowed to refuse the actions of the player who are too good. This is no longer true in Atlantic City. While technology today consists of casinos identified with the card counters is still labor-intensive to track everyone in the fashion, this is still typically left in the floor man first suspects someone of the counting, which in turn sets off chain of events. The key to longevity then is to avoid first pressure point. If possible, you should disguise your counting from the pit personnel. Casino countermeasures. After identifying the card counter, the casino has several options determining alternating with the game perceived the house, and then taking action in several ways detrimental to the card counter, probably foremost the house scuffler earlier in the pack has penetration decrease the card counting phase of the progressively steep uphill climb. Recall the deep penetration into the pack desirable the card counters. Another countermeasure is to restrict the player from the betting and clearly betting spread for some sort of the required for a card counter to be successful. If the casino imposes a flat betting in the bad news of the card counter carrier at this establishment, casino can also introduce more decks into the game. Remember, the fewer decks are preferable for players. How may resort to preferential shuffling, which means the dealer shuffles at will and it isn't the worst form of floor man or dealer counts the deck. Preferably the shuffle as the pack the count does becomes favorable to the player. In our opinion, the unethical as it changes the expectation for the game and for even players who are not counting, and hence obviously what is happening to them. The casino may also change the actual rules of the game. This being anything with a more restricted doubling and is disallowing entry into the house may often include the table to getting a counter to move the one that's more crowded. Once this starts happening, this isn't much of a point in sticking around. If the challenge is just to prove that you can still beat the game, the casino will eventually construct a game that is unbeatable, and the longer you play, the more likely you will be able to recognize the next time around. In your own opinion, your best point of the no return once the pit has inkling that you're a counter. It's only a matter of time before countermeasures will be employed, and you will be left with a game that is unprofitable. What to do? The major questions facing card counters, the answer is developed in an act or some sort of this is to learn to disguise your play. Life expectancy with a card counter could be considerable to the extent of the use of the good act. What's more, we have found implementation accurate that most of the enjoyable part of the game. The knockout system may easily allow the player more time, energy, concentrate, letting camouflage is sometimes necessary to play with skilled blackjack game in the casino environment. Being allowed to apply your newfound card counting skills is more in consideration one have been tackled in different ways. The different offer the here sampling late. Ken Olson, former vice president of the Pacific Stock Exchange, best-selling author of the book of the one all things video game Pac-Man, and in the blackjack world, Unson man responsible for Atlantic City law with the disallow of the banning of the card counters unless. Olson also tried to have the practice outlawed in the van of the thought unsuccessfully. While playing in the casino, Unson would often appear with a flat-out drunk, and when he would mumble the incoherent teeter precautiously on the seat in order to convince the pit that he was unworthy of attention. Once his act was succeeded, he was able to employ the numerous bet spreads. However, the no act is perfect. After Unson is identified and barred from several establishments, he was forced to resort to elaborate physical disguise. Can you play? One amusing incident, Elston pulled a stunt on his card counting buddies while at the dunes. While playing a situation with the exceptional high count, Unson put a pair of underpants on his head, which were embezzled. I crapped out in Vegas. He bet $500, won the wager, and then, to the astonishment, all he threw at his hat on the layout. Tossed his caps and chips over another player at the table that ran out of the casino. Sten casino boss didn't know that the player was thrown and the chips was actually one of Olson's partners. Escaped, branded him with lunatic whose play pays the welcomed at Dunes for years to come. Later in this card counting carry with the Yeltsin formed teams that use the legendary big player technique. Big players can be used several ways. One common approach to the little players are stationed at every several tables in the casino, counting through shoes and placing table to minimum bets, while big players wander around aimlessly. Even and so, after superstitious high rollers tend to go, big players gets a hunch and plays a few hands, perhaps a betting maximum as the table chosen. Similarly, seemingly at random, unbeknownst to the casino personnel, the big player has actually been signaled into the game by one of the little players after the count has been unfavorable. When the big player arrives at the table, the present count may be relayed to him via the signal worked out beforehand. Alternatively, the little player can simply make all the betting and the strategic decision big player, again through the signals. In this case, the big player does need not to know anything about the expert play, only how to read follow the signals. When the deck goes sour, the big player is signaled to leave. The big player then dawdles while waiting for the next signal, indicating a juicy deck. The beauty of this technique of the big player makes only large wagers and always positive situations. Because he never varies his bet, big player appears to have fun-loving high roller haphazardly making his way from one lucky table to the next. Casino personnel see a big bettor jumping from game to game, never staying at a particular table long enough, if possible, to be counting cards. Second technique is the little player and the big player play together in full time at the same table. And the little player usually flat bets a modest amount, and the big player bets much more, relying on the little player for all decisions. Again, this is all done with a Viva. The signal is worked out beforehand. In the second variation, the play with the big player acting as a manner that makes it impossible for him or her to be counting cards. He can do whatever he wishes. He usually does, and he looks up at the mirrored ceiling, checks out the cocktail waitress to his shoes, talks sport with the pit boss, goes to bathroom, whatever, because he associates his count with the cards for him and telling them exactly how to proceed at all times. Indeed, some teams have the big player simply play basic strategy throughout, leaving the game to be realized from a large bet spread. The information about how much the bet is often relayed through the location, not an amount of little players' wagers. Austins wrote another incident in which one of his big players had just lost a big double down on Tropicana. He grunted, loudly waved his arms, and knocked over the Bloody Mary. Table of cards and chips were soaked with the ice and booze and tomato juice and pieces of lime. The dealer grabbed a towel. The boss ran over the neck with new decks of cards. In the meantime, Austins' big player had noticed a teammate who was signaling him to an adjacent table. He stood up and left him, commenting, "I don't play at wet tables." Ian Anderson employs a solitary act in which he is well suited, but he goes so far as to befriend dealers, pit personnel, all while maintaining an air of humility and feigns ignorance of the game with well-placed gifts in the floorman and tips of the dealers. Anderson describes the case of the either after case where casino personnel have bent over back to come and do his aid. Alright, it's one fantastic story. A free-spirited casino executive began selling information during Blackjack game during the course of the session. Much willingly dealing of the transpired between Anderson and this executive, who was casino vice president. For start, the vice president offered the Anderson the option to surrender for the quarter of his bet without looking at his card. But the Anderson, sensing the bigger things that we were to come, agreed, coughed up nearly $25, apparently thinking he'd lured the big fish out of the dead price president, telling you what, you can give me a quarter of your chips now, and I'll not play another hand. Anderson parried out with a thrust. You'd be cheating yourself out of 3/4 with my chips. Shortly thereafter, Anderson was allowed to surrender 16 versus the dealer 10 for only 1/8 of his bet, saving several $100. On subsequent hand, Vice President freely turned over the dealer's whole card. Anderson couldn't decide how to play. Still later, Anderson had a $1,000 bet out and held on 2 10s. Dealer up card with a 6. Anderson again inquired whether he would allow to see his dealer's hole. The card this time, with a fee of $300, was well worth the down card as well as 10. Knowing the dealer had 16, Anderson proceeded to resplit his total to 5 times, winding up the totals of 14, 16, 21, 19, 15, and 18. Dealer hit his hand with a 7 and busted less than 200 investment. Anderson was won $6,000. Indeed, a new book, Burning the Tables in Las Vegas. Anderson advocates complete paradigm shift by which the player abandons the traditional and versatile stance casino bosses in favor of their kinder, gentler, federal approach. Lance Hubble adopted the much more conservative of the style play, which tried to avoid the casino personnel altogether. The psychological professor of the home recommended the method of the play with the way you should avoid any unusual behavior in casino. Everything from the way you hold the cards to the way you travel should play right. When it comes to mythology, doubling, halving wagers for a purpose for the cover. The humble say that will drift your van slightly from the non-resporting and immediately changing the count. But these methods will help you to be blessed in anonymity. Stanford Wong has also weighted in the subject. Wong points out that the pit personnel see thousands of the faces on a daily basis. To remember undesirable, they tend to focus on the particular attributes that they associate with those of the players. So Wong advised that you need to have something outstanding, the feature of the under your control. In this vein, the Wong has the tax time worn distinctive items, clothing, and the jewelry active with intoxicated, even appear to have physical impediments. In this area, have drawn the heat of the previous visit. He has reappeared of the casino without a feature making it difficult for the casino personnel to make the connection. Wrong has long advocated for the use of the back counting and warning. It has come to the affectionately called to get maximum bang for your buck. But you may recall the back counting until standing behind the game and the counting down and pack and becoming favorable with you sit down and play. If you later become unfavorable, you get back and leave. In this way, you avoid playing with negative expectation. When you sit down, you must appear to have just begun playing. If properly done, the casino will not realize you have taken your spot. You can throw out with a big bet knowing that you have an advantage. The casino would likely think that you're as the average wager. You can maintain the big bets as long as The count remains efficient, positive, but back counting is not without its problems. First, it's not easy to stand behind the game and the countdown on deck. The main problem is that the player blocks your view, and you must strategically locate yourself at all costs. See all cards. Help you to have something to do while back counting. You won't get away with it for long for the entire afternoon. They also do the standby. All you do is stand behind table after table, waiting to jump in. The boss will eventually catch on to what you're doing and put a stop to it. These are all nice stories. Alright, but in the meantime, here are a few simple rules to follow that will help you get your way through your first blackjack card counting session. Be the table minimum until you're comfortable with your counting. This is counting cards mentally, know the correct plays, but table minimum until you're confident with your ability to make it take an hour or more to become accustomed to surroundings. If you lose count during the play, bet the table minimum until the next shuffle. Recall that you and all your always start the count at the initial running count after a shuffle. If you're losing, don't start betting more money to try to get back into the back at once. This might be a good time to reread Chapter 7 and care that must be taken when bidding. Remembering a card counter bets more only when he has a mathematical advantage. However, this seems to be the part of the human nature when losing to want to bet more money in an effort to recoup your losses as quickly as possible. This often leads to even greater losses. All card counters have both winning and losing sessions. Keep bigger picture in mind. Long-running over advantage will bear out. Long-running is made up of the countless sessions. Don't let short-run fluctuations get the best of you, whether monetarily or psychologically. Summary: simple methods to enhance profit available to card counters seeking out with better planning conditions, employing more sophisticated, better techniques and analytics strategies, using acting careful, able, fruitful, but tipping and cover plays to be easy at profit should not be overused. Daniel Schwitzlinger provides perhaps the best summary for the chapter when he says, the goal is to walk into a casino and win with the most money possible, consistent with it being well going back to the next time. A synopsis we find presented the final top 10 list. Top 10 phrases card counters should never say at the blackjack table. What is the count? Can I sit out a few hands while the low cards come out? I can't keep up when you're scooping up the card so fast. Do you give good penetration? Did you give good penetration? I've just finished reading Knockout Blackjack. Is this a DOA, DAS, or S17 table that allows the back counting of the mid-shoe entry? Go ahead, deal another round. You won't run out of cards. It's mostly tens and aces left. My name, Thorpe, Dr. Edward O. Thorpe. Yeah, like I'm gonna take every money with a count of -7. Please tell the first baseman to hold this card so I can see them. And number 1, 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 0 minus plus 1 minus 2. Then it gets in the appendix of rules of blackjack.